残酷な天使のように少年よ神話になれ青い風が今胸のドアを叩いても私だけをただ見つめて微笑んでるあなたそっとくれるもの求めることに夢中で運命さえまだ知らない痛いけな瞳だけどいつか気づくでしょうその背中には
The police came down there and confiscated all flashlights and cameras. They confiscated everything that they thought that we would use for signaling.
On February 19, 1942, the President signed Executive Order 9066, allowing the U.S. Army to, quote, prescribe military areas in such places and of such extent from which any or all persons may be excluded.
Come at you with a bayonet in your back and say you're going to move into a horse stall, you do.
As a result of the order, 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were evicted from their homes in Oregon, Washington, and California to internment camps across the country.
Assembly centers. The evacuees cooperated wholeheartedly. The many loyal among them felt that this was a sacrifice they could make in behalf of America's war effort. In small towns as well as large, up and down the coast, the moving continued.
A man named Fred Toyosaburo Korematsu, however, refused to leave his home in San Leandro, California, resulting in his conviction of violating Civilian Exclusion Order No. 34. Korematsu made efforts to disguise his Japanese ancestry, such as having minor plastic surgery on his eyes, but he was arrested by authorities.
And then one day my girlfriend wanted to meet me. I was waiting for her at the corner, and she didn't show up. I ran out of cigarettes. So, like a darn fool, I went across the street to the drugstore, and someone recognized me, I assumed, because when I came back and I was standing there for another 5 minutes, then the police came, and they looked around and looked at me and said, "Did you see any short Japanese person around here, Asian?" I said, "No." They looked at me and says, "Well, let me see your identification." By that time, the 2 MPs came from the military. And he says, "We have to take you to the city hall."
While in a county jail, the American Civil Liberties Union's Ernest Bisig decided to use Korematsu as basis for the unconstitutionality of Executive Order 9066.
The internment. But of course, in order to do that, you have to have a test case. So we were on the lookout to find a case of that kind. It wasn't easy until I heard of Fred Korematsu's case in the newspapers.
Korematsu eventually appealed his case to the U.S. Supreme Court after a Californian District Court and the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and it was heard in October of 1944. The overall question being asked was, did the President and Congress go beyond their war powers by implementing exclusion and restricting the constitutional rights of Americans of Japanese descent? And so, the battle had begun. Justice Hugo Black argued that Korematsu was not targeted for his race, but for the idea that America was at war with the Japanese Empire. And the military, the President, and Congress felt that domestic security was at risk by having those with Japanese ancestry scattered across the West Coast. Justice Owen Roberts, Robert Jackson, and Frank Murphy, on the other hand, pointed out that Korematsu was only recognized for his ancestry. taken by the military without regard to his status as an American citizen and the equal protection of the law he has under the 14th Amendment. In a rare 6-3 decision, the court ruled that Executive Order 9066 was constitutional and that exclusion of a certain group of people of ideas is justified during circumstances of, quote, emergency and peril. The Japanese internment was also within the war powers of the President and Congress, especially with the ongoing war against the Japanese Empire. Korematsu had been slain. However, a Professor Peter Irons discovered in the early 1980s that a Solicitor General Charles Fahey purposely prevented military and federal intelligence from reaching the courts that stated that there was no security risk present at the time of the internment. He petitioned then for a writ of coram nobis, which designated an error in an earlier court decision that could have been prevented if certain information was provided, and was granted by a district court in San Francisco in 1983 to Korematsu himself. Although his conviction was clear, the 1944 decision could not be and never was overturned. The Korematsu versus United States case created one of the strongest foundations for civil rights in the fight against discrimination in American history. Although first dismissed as unimportant thanks to the significance of World War II at the time, it was used in abundance for future reference in cases and political discussions even today, especially when citing equal protection in the 14th Amendment. The internment of Japanese Americans should be a prime example of the result of the people and their rights and liberties being under-prioritized, and Korematsu made it clear that such an event should never occur again.